Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Preparedness Podcast, the podcast that brings you the best in preparedness information. You can find us online at thepreparednesspodcast.com. My name is Rob Hannes, and I'm the host for the show. You can email me directly at rob@prepcast.info. Folks, it's been a real busy week, and we're having lots of fun. Podcast a little bit late this week, but that's because we've had interviews, and I've been doing interviews and giving interviews, and last night I did a webinar with Survival Mom Lisa Bedford on EMP, and we're just having a really great time. It's just there's so many hours in a day, and I apologize for the podcast being a little bit late, but we've got a couple podcasts coming out, including this one. I think you're going to find very informative. Plus, I'm still hoping to do a current events at the end of the week, so we're still looking at hopefully for 3 this week. This is the last few days before the Self-Reliance Expo in Mesa, Arizona. You can find more information out by going to selfrelianceexpo.com. It's going to be October 26th and 27th. I do plan on being there. I'll be the guy in the white T-shirt with the Preparedness Podcast logo on it. If you get a chance to go to the website, do me a favor, check out the listener survey. There's a banner on the left. It's an anonymous survey. It just kind of helps me learn more about the audience and what they like, what they don't like, and their listening habits and stuff like that. It helps produce a better podcast. Also, if you're a subscriber to iTunes, I'd appreciate if you could leave a ratings there. Hopefully a good one. But the ratings, I guess, are used for other people in iTunes to find more relevant podcasts to their search and stuff. So if you could leave us a ratings, I really appreciate that. I can't comment through there, so if you have a comment, you can go to the website at thepreparednesspodcast.com and click on Contact Us, and there's a form there, and of course you can always email me. While you're on the website, check out the weekly newsletter. You'll see a little banner that says weekly newsletter. It's actually not a newsletter at this point. I hope to at some point actually release a weekly or a bi-weekly newsletter about a summary of what's going on and stuff. But right now, what you're signing up for is a weekly preparedness tip. Lots of subscribers have jumped on board in that, and at this point, I don't think anybody has unsubscribed yet. So that tells me that they're liking the content. So go ahead and sign up and see what it's all about. These are actually not just little itty-bitty tips. These are actually article length tidbits of preparedness information. Typically, it's the little detailed stuff that we don't really have the time to get into in a podcast a lot of times, or they're things that I get to explore a little bit more because I have a little more time to put into the article. Because we've been so busy, I really had hoped to have the Preparedness Capability checklist out by now. It's taking longer than I thought. The interest in the podcast has become way more than I expected this soon, and I appreciate it. I thank every one of you very much for listening and downloading and helping to support the podcast. But because of all the time and like I said, the interviews and the stuff that we've been doing, the stuff we're trying to do, I haven't had as much time to finish up that book. But trust me, I'm working on it, and I hope to have it out by the end of the year, and I'm only saying that because that's my goal. I hope to make it, but please don't string me up from the nearest tree if I don't make it. While you're on the website, do us a favor and check out the advertisers that are there. We have a good section of advertisers. We have C's, we've got food, we've got camping and survival items. We've got a whole assortment of items that are there that you as a prepper should be looking at. So go ahead and check them out. Today's topic on the podcast is, again, hyperinflation. I don't particularly like to hit the same topic over and over again. However, I do feel this is it's probably the biggest issue facing us as preppers today is the economy. It is a major concern because it's not just like a little recession. It's not just, something that we can overlook. There is a significant money or currency issue in play right now, and I'm beginning to see what I think is the beginning stages of hyperinflation. And I'm actually going to have a podcast that actually goes into this a little bit more detail hopefully next week. And I say hopefully because I need to do a little more research, pull some more prices, and make sure I got all my ducks in a row. However, it's very important to understand what hyperinflation is, how it can happen, what it means to you personally, as well as the economy for this country and the global economy. This is not a little hiccup. This is something that we need to take seriously. And because it's so important, and it's so important to understand, because this is going to be an event that will probably last a minimum of a year, possibly as much as 2, 3, 4 years. It's hard to say. We don't know. But I've been trying to bring as much information as possible so you have as much information as possible, good information about what it is and how you can prepare for it. A few days ago, I came across a blog by Vincent Cate, who entitled it an FAQ for Hyperinflation Skeptics. And I started reading this blog. This is one of the best FAQs I have ever seen on hyperinflation, probably ever. It's written in a very plain language. It doesn't use the very big words that economists love to use that confuse and befuddle us because we don't really understand all the euphemisms that they use and stuff like that, like quantitative easing instead of just saying printing money or monetizing the debt. And then they even confuse us more. They say we're not monetizing the debt. We're doing quantitative easing, and it's they want to make it as complicated as possible. So we just go, I'm just going to watch some football. But it's important that you understand what it is and stuff. So what I did is I reached out to Vincent and I asked him to come on to the podcast for an interview, and he agreed. And I had actually done it this morning, and it was a really good interview. And I learned some things, and we talked about his FAQ. And even though this is going to be a two-part podcast because the interview actually went fairly long. And we didn't even go through half of the information he has in his FAQ. So even though you're going to hear me mention his URL again in the interview, I want to give it again to you now. His blog is howfiatdies.blogspot.com. And if you go to that fairly soon, you're going to see this FAQ. However, in the show notes, I will have the permalink linked in there. You'll be able to go to it at any time. Before we get to the interview, I just want to talk about the sponsor for the podcast, and that's FlyingEagleGold.com. Last time I told you Jeff had 30 1/10 ounce American Eagle bullion coins. They're gone. Somebody snatched them up quickly. I think within a couple days, they're gone. However, because Jeff is not a coin dealer, he doesn't hold inventory, what happens is, and this is one of the things you need to consider when you look for the person you're going to be buying your gold and silver from, is will they liquidate it for you when you want to liquidate it? Not when they're ready, but when you're ready. Jeff doesn't hold your funds and your coins for 8, 12 weeks while he pretends to look for a buyer. He's out there hitting the market, hitting his clients, who wants the coins, and that's how he gets the money for you. So this is why he has coins available now. He has a new batch of 42 1/10 ounce American Eagle bullion coins. The price of gold has changed. Right now, he can offer these for $198 per coin. What I want you to do is I want you to pick up the phone. I don't want you to call Jeff. I want you to call another coin dealer, and I want you to ask them how much it's going to cost for you to buy one American Eagle coin in a 1/10 ounce size. And I want you to see what they are charging, because then you're going to find out why Jeff's price is as good as it is. And remember, you can buy this at one coin at a time. You're going to find, quite honestly, that the other coin dealers want you to buy more than one coin. Like for this price, you probably have to buy, I don't know how many coins come in a roll. I forget. I think it's either 20 or 40, but they're going to want you to buy that many coins to get this price. That's why this is a good price, and you should act on it now. However, just like the last batch of coins disappeared quickly, this batch of coins is probably going to also disappear quickly. So if you've been thinking about starting to own gold, or if you've been thinking about adding to your gold, now's the time to do it. This is really a great price. You can buy one or you can buy all of them, but you got to act quickly. Call Jeff at 623-327-1778, and please let him know you heard about it on the Preparedness Podcast. I'm on the phone with Vincent Cate, who had written an FAQ called the name of your blog is How Fiat Dies, and you have an FAQ for hyperinflation skeptics. I was perusing the internet and came across this, and I really liked what I saw here. It is written in plain language, which I find a lot of economists try not to use. They try to use big words and all sorts of euphemisms, so to speak, to try to, I think, to confuse and to confound the issue that is about as simple as a home budget. That's how I look at it. So when I look at something in the economy, if it wouldn't work in a home budget, it won't typically work for a global economy or a country's economy, because to me it's very similar to the same thing. You shouldn't take on debt. You should pay your debt off as soon as possible. You can't have an unlimited run of credit and stuff like that.
Yep.
So
it confuses a lot of people, though.
Well, I think that's the point. It's supposed to confuse people so they don't know.
Yep.
Okay, so let's talk about this FAQ. It's really long. I was really surprised at how. I mean, you obviously took a lot of time to even just typing this up. If you were just do a brain dump, it would still take a long time to write this. So, how did you? Let's cover. How did you come to basically have the blog How Fiat Dies? And I've been looking at some stuff here, and you're kind of chronologing some issues of the not just the American economy, but global economy. So tell me a little bit about how you got to this point to write this FAQ.
Wow. Well, I guess with all this economic troubles, I sort of, started reading up more on this, and it seemed like hyperinflation was the one problem that that we could be ending up going into, and that you had to be aware of, right? And so I started researching more on that, and then I just decided to do this blog. I wrote a big, long thing, but I wasn't getting any feedback on it, and I thought if I did a blog, then I could get some feedback, so I started doing a blog. Yeah, it's been fun. I mean, there's not a lot. It's not a really popular blog yet, but it's been, getting some feedback is good. This post, actually, I did a couple of weeks ago or a month ago. I was responding to some things that Mish had written about hyperinflation being nonsense. And I had several different comments on his post, and then I decided to take them and make my own post on my own blog and sort of respond to all of Mish's complaints about, hyperinflation. And so that post did pretty well, and then I sort of extended that post into this one, sort of responding to all the questions people have about hyperinflation.
Okay, so before I forget and be a terrible host, your blog is located at howfiatdies.blogspot.com, and I believe this FAQ is the page that you're going to get when you go there.
It's the most recent post. So,
but if for listeners who are listening to this down the road, you just go to the show notes for this podcast, and I'll have a link to that, and it'll link directly to this post. Now, who I want to ask you who Mish is, because I think, if I remember correctly, I found your FAQ from a comment you made on, I think it was Business Insider for Raul somebody or other, I can't remember, and he was basically totally dissing even the idea that we could even possibly hit hyperinflation. And again, he was using these words that don't necessarily mean anything or could mean several things, and it was like, how many big ambiguous words could you use in your article is what it kind of seemed like to me. And so it was when I came to your FAQ here is just like, wow, very plain language, very simple out there. But you've referenced Mish a couple times. Who is Mish?
Mike Shedlock, and he does a blog globaleconomicanalysis.blogspot.com. He's a very popular, economics author, but he believes in deflation and doesn't believe in hyperinflation. So I read his stuff, but I disagree with him on this one issue. So I've sort of argued with him, or tried to argue on his comments over the last couple of years, and finally just did a big long thing to sort of refute everything he says about hyperinflation, basically.
Right. Okay. So let's just cover the first few. Like I said, this is fairly long. So the first few questions cover the aspect of how plausible hyperinflation is, which is something I think most people don't believe can happen. So the first few questions, how hyperinflation is defined, is there a real chance of the U.S. dollar could get to hyperinflation? The government or central bank would never decide to actually have hyperinflation. And the other two you have here is, why would the Fed suddenly print trillions of dollars, and hyperinflation would never happen in America? To me, that all kind of is the type of responses I get when I do talk to people about hyperinflation, which, by the way, I don't know if you have checked out the blog site, but hyperinflation is one of the main worries that I think that we have, and these are very common feedback I get. It's like, oh, that you can't define hyperinflation like that. It's not 26% a year. It's like 1,000 or something like that. It's like people are in denial. So let's cover some of these few topics here and go over some of that.
Yeah, there's a really strange thing that people think hyperinflation is not even worth looking at, right? They think it's so unreasonable that they won't even investigate it. And so I've tried to make it easy for them to see that it's not so unreasonable. This idea that inflation has to be 50% per month or they're not worried about it. I mean, if you get 26% a year, your life is going to be different.
Right. Well, and that I think is, I did a podcast where I was talking about this, and that's, I think, the general definition is 100% inflation over a 3-year period, which works out to be about almost 26%.
Yeah. I mean, if in 3 years your retirement fund is worth half as much, this is important. You should take this seriously. But most people don't.
Right. So let's now. What is there a real chance of the dollar going into hyperinflation?
Yeah. So Bernholz did this study, and he used the 50% per month, which is a much higher threshold than I normally would use. And he studied like 29 cases of hyperinflation and found that if they had debt over 80% of GNP and the deficit was more than 40% of government spending, that essentially it always ended up in hyperinflation. So if you just found a government whose debt and deficit were that high, probably in a few years they're going to have hyperinflation. So it seems like we can predict it pretty reliably. And the U.S. is at these kind of numbers. And they're getting worse.
Yeah, and that's the scary part, is that there's no end in sight. So one of the issues that people say is, well, why would they choose to go to hyperinflation? I mean, they wouldn't do this. They wouldn't print all these trillions of dollars. They wouldn't take on all this debt if they know that's going to lead to hyperinflation. And I think that is important to understand that, and you make a very clear case in your FAQ here that they don't voluntarily say, yeah, we're going to go into hyperinflation. It's the end result of bad decisions.
Yeah. The problem is the government needs money to spend. And if nobody else is buying their bonds, then they get the central bank to do it. And this is the thing people are missing, is it's not that the central bank is just, being stupid and making hyperinflation. The central bank is trying to keep the government able to pay its bills. And if the central bank doesn't buy the bonds and the government can't pay their employees, the employees aren't going to show up for work. And the government's going to collapse, and the central bank is created by the government. So if the government collapses, the central bank is gone too. So they kind of have to help out the government. And truly, I think you should think of the central bank and the government as inside one box. You know, they're what happens externally to this box is what you should look at, right? So if the central bank is buying a bond from the government and giving them cash, and the government is spending the cash, outside of that box, all you see is they're printing money and spending money, right? This little accounting game internally of bonds and whatnot, it doesn't matter from the external view of this black box. And so effectively, that's what's really going on, is they're going to be printing money and spending money. So
yeah, and spending and spending and spending.
And spending and spending and spending.
Right.
And people like Mish think there's a limit to how much they can print, but there is no limit to how much money the government can print and spend.
Well, and one of those reasons that we can get away with it is because we're the global reserve currency, right?
Right. As long as that lasts, then we're sort of exporting our inflation to the rest of the world. But there's no reason to believe it'll last forever, and there's clear evidence that the Chinese and the Russians and whatnot are trying to move away from the dollar. And when they finally get away from the dollar, there's going to be much less demand for dollars, and the value of the dollars will drop. So.
Exactly. Now, let's I was going to get into this a little bit later, but we touched on it now, so let's go over how do we export our inflation. Now, I touched on this, and I'll be honest, I understand it intuitively, but I don't really have the sense of how to explain it well.
I think I can explain it. So the Chinese want to peg their currency to the U.S. dollar, right? So that they can, sell us stuff, and the prices are, what they're making, the prices that we're paying and the prices they're getting are sort of linked together. As we print more and more dollars, in order for their currency to stay pegged at the same exchange rate, they have to print more and more yuan. But as they print more and more yuan, they get inflation. And so we are seeing less inflation because they are sort of swallowing some of it for us. And by having the dollar all around the world and other countries, even Anguilla is actually pegged. We have an East Caribbean dollar, which is pegged to the U.S. dollar. So as the U.S. prints more money, we have to print more EC dollars, and we end up taking some of the pain and swallowing some of their inflation, basically.
And I think that's one of the hard concepts to understand. For example, when I talk to my wife about hyperinflation, she's like, well, if we have this debt, why can't we just print off the money and pay off the debt? I'm like, well, it's not that easy. And then I failed to be able to explain it succinctly to her. But, when people do peg the dollar, their currency to the dollar, this is how they get inflation. And I think that's important to understand when you look at what China is doing with trying to become an alternative to the petrodollar and talking to other countries about, not using the global reserve currency to trade. That affects the value of the dollar because it becomes less popular.
Yep.
Now, hyperinflation can never happen in America, right? It can't happen.
But it's happened many times already, actually. And several times in the colonial period. It happened during the Revolution. There's not worth the continental was the phrase that still people can still hear it today. And then the South definitely had hyperinflation. The North was right on the borderline of this 26%. They basically had 100% in 3 years. So they pretty well had hyperinflation in the North as well. And then in the Great Depression, the central bank, the Fed, only had 40%. For every dollar that they had issued, which they said they would convert to gold, they only had 40 cents worth of gold. So they were basically a big Ponzi scheme, which as they went in the 20s, printing lots more money, everything looked great. But when people started getting worried about the Fed and taking out their gold, turning in for every $20 you gave them, they had to give you an ounce of gold, right? Well, as people did this, it became clear they didn't really have enough gold to give everybody. And so the Ponzi scheme was in danger of collapsing. And so what the government did is make it illegal for people to own gold. and they saved the central bank by doing this. But if they hadn't done that, the paper money probably would have become worthless in the 30s as well. So, and then now, it's interesting, each of these, from the Revolutionary War to the Civil War is around 70 years, and from the Civil War to the Great Depression is around 70 years, and from the Great Depression till now is around 70 years. So to me, it looks like there's a generational thing where people forget that printing lots of money is bad, right?
Right, and 70 years would seem, that's a couple generations there. It's enough for anybody who would be around to remember it isn't around anymore. And
right. They're not in politics, or they're not in power anymore, even if they're still alive. And so the decisions are made by people who don't remember that. Even if they were alive back then, they're too young to remember it or something, right?
Right. Right. So, well, I think it's important that people understand that not only can it happen here in the United States, but it already has happened here several times. And of course, when I say that, people like, oh well, but that was, the Confederate dollars, or that was way back when, that was in the past or something. And it's like, yeah, but it illustrates the point that it can happen, because it has happened already.
Yeah, and where we are now will be in the past someday.
Exactly.
And people will look back and see how stupid we were too. So, yeah.
Okay, so let's the math for the hyperinflation. You've got a little equation here where price level equals the money supply times the velocity divided by the real GNP. Let's start with real GNP. What is that, and how does that relate to hyperinflation?
So there's this equation of exchange, which is a core, very basic economics idea. Basically, for your GNP for the year is how many times the money changed hands times what it did, sort of divided by a price level type thing. Anyway, so you can make out this formula, right? And it has to. It's sort of just has to be. It's a tautology or something, that the total amount of goods bought and sold is the number of times the money changed hands times the real value times some price level. And so anyway, it's a core idea, but it helps understand hyperinflation, because the price level is influenced by the velocity of the money and the quantity of money and how big your GNP is. And so you can get prices going up even without any more money created, just because the velocity is going up. And that's what happens in hyperinflation.
Now, the velocity of money is how fast people are spending it. They're not saving it. They want to get rid of it.
It's how many times it changes hands during the year. So like a normal money, maybe you get paid and you spend it at the end of the month, and you hold on to your money on average for a month or so, right? Or something. So maybe the money changes hands 12 times a year or 6 times a year or something like that. But in hyperinflation, people end up getting paid more often, like maybe every week or maybe every day, and people run from when they get paid to spend their money because the value is dropping so fast. And so the money changes hands really, really fast.
Now, I was under, again, I'm not an economist, so I don't necessarily understand, but I thought the GNP, the gross national product, was a value of the goods and services that we generated. How is that tied to the velocity of money?
Well, the way, if you look at all the goods and services that were generated, that's sort of the total number of sales for the year, right? And if you look at how much money we have, the average number of times the money had to be used to make that GNP, because some money could be used again and again and again throughout the year, right? So if you look at the number of times the money was used, the amount of money we have, that's got to match the GNP.
Oh, I see. So the faster the velocity of money, the higher the GNP, which is why it's the... No. The equation just has to match, right? So if the money goes faster, it could be just the prices are going up, or it could be the quantity of money was going down, or it could be the nominal GNP is going up. It's an equation, so something has to give somewhere. But it doesn't mean that the country is better off just because the money is going faster. And usually it's worse off.
what happens in hyperinflation, things get all messed up, and people stop buying luxuries. People are just barely able to get food. All kind of businesses shut down. Governments put in price controls, and so all kind of more businesses have to shut down because they can't operate like that. It's crazy. If you're a store, imagine you buy some stuff for your store, you sell it to people, and then you try to take the money you got from selling stuff and go buy more goods from your supplier. But if your money is worth half as much next week when you go to your supplier, it could be out of business. Right? So it's really hard. It hurts your GNP. But having the GNP get hurt makes prices go higher, not lower.
Okay. Now, why can't you stop hyperinflation just by having the central bank stop printing all the money or stop monetizing the debt?
Right. It seems really like there's no problem. Anytime you want to stop hyperinflation, you just have the bank stop monetizing debt and stop printing money, and there's no more hyperinflation. The problem is the government needs money. If the government's spending far more than it gets in taxes, the only way it can do this is if it keeps selling bonds. But if the value of the money is dropping fast, nobody wants to buy the bonds. So the only way you could sell the bonds is to get the central bank to buy the bonds. And since the government controls the central bank, they always get it to buy. If they have to change the people, if they have to change the laws, if they have to ignore the laws, whatever, they get the central bank to buy their bonds. Otherwise, the government has to shut down. So they're not, it always turns out they win. They get the money. When things get desperate, they find a way to make the central bank buy their bonds.
Right, and this is what we have seen. I haven't seen the figures lately, but this is where we see those figures where, the Fed is buying 70 or 80% of the government bonds. Nobody else is buying them, so basically the Fed buys them, gives the government the money to spend, and they just keep doing that cycle over and over.
Right. Now, of course, Bernanke is saying he's not monetizing the debt, right? But he absolutely is. But he doesn't want people to think that's his plan. He wants people to think he's just trying to stimulate the economy or lower interest rates or anything else, because if people understand that what's going on is the central bank is giving money to the government and the government's spending the money, everybody will expect inflation. So they're trying to keep it as confused as possible. Exactly
right. They're keeping it as confused as possible. They're basically telling you exactly, by not saying, "Oh, we're not doing this. This is exactly what we're doing." I mean, I look at this. You can often tell what a weak point is about a product from their advertisement. So, for example, when Oldsmobile had an ad they ran on television that said, "We're not your father's car." No, you're exactly my father's car. You haven't changed. They try to redirect your thinking by directly denying whatever it is that's there. And this is exactly the same. Oh, we're not monetizing debt. No, it's exactly what you're doing. And I find it just amazing that the media and these so-called economists are just buying it hook, line, and sinker, and they're not pulling them out in the carpet and saying, "Look, this is exactly what you're doing. What's going on here?"
Yeah. One joke is that we tell that the rumor is true is when it's officially denied, and so then if they're spending the time, some important officials getting out there and going in front of the press and saying that this is not true, then it's got to be true, because if it wasn't true, he wouldn't waste his time on that.
Right.
There's a guy that wrote up something about hyperinflation, and I think it was Peru, and he heard on the radio the president of the central bank or whatever get on saying that they're not going to devalue the dollar, the Peru currency, whatever it was, and he immediately took all of his money and converted it to U.S. dollars for his company, and a week later the local currency was worth half as much, right? So an official denial is good evidence that it's probably true.
Okay, that's it for part 1. Next time, we're going to conclude with part 2. It's only a little bit shorter than this episode is, but it's just as informative. So until next time, folks, enjoy life and be safe.